Good morning, everybody. Orange J here with another War of the Visions video, and today we are going to get a first look at Cipher in action. Got him to 140 today. Have not reincarnated him yet. I'm going to let those mind spheres trickle in throughout the week so I don't, spend as least Visio as possible. But we got him at 140. I'm going to show you the team comp I'm going to be running him with. No vision card for him yet, obviously, so I'm going to be using a placeholder there. But real quick, let me show you the formation and kind of my thought process around building a team around him, the kind of buffs you want, things like that. So there he is. I've built him up with a unit attack resist piece of gear, and you can see just with this setup, he's walking into a fight with over 40 unit resist and over 40 AoE resist. Now, I see his bravery's 50. He's in my barracks. It'll be up by, next week when it matters. So don't at me in the comments there. But you get both of those pretty high. And then obviously this is somebody who's going to be running into the fight or running to his teammates and casting this, like honeycomb barrier on himself and his allies to further just reduce all his damage. So you're kind of layering damage reduction on him. You definitely want him casting that. And I think that's an obvious first turn rotation for him. After that, it gets kind of interesting. His other buffs, and we can look at them, are self buffs. So Bravado, I think this is okay. Like giving himself attack AP restore and healing down for attacks for 4 turns. That's pretty good. And maybe on like a 3-turn map, I could see that being really important. I've also given him a TMR that self buffs haste. I want to see where his AI kind of like slots those in. So we're going to see if he gives himself momentum, before he starts self-buff again or after. And then in his High Dragoon sub job, which is I think the sub job you want to run him on for access to these like piercing damage moves, he has 2 self buffs. Swift Drake Banner, which is a move 1 agility buff. Probably just want to turn that off in most cases. I'm going to leave it on for this first test run just to see when he does it. And then the other one is Dragon Scale, which I actually like a lot because it gives him attack, defense, and protect. So if you're running him into physical teams, it's just another layer. Actually, it's like kind of 2 more layers. Defense hardly counts, I guess, but it's a couple more layers of protection for him. He's a guy who wants to be able to trade blows with the enemy and be healing himself back up. That's the thought process there. Okay, vision card lineup. Here's the VCs. If you're running him with a sword knight, sword warrior, sword knight combo, your 3 big VCs are this one, Between Hope and Despair. This gives you slash piercing, slash attack, and unit resist. Then you have the Halloween Friends one, Lord of the Hallowed Eve. There's your luck, spirit, and agility buff. And then his vision card will eventually replace Death Machine for me. Now, right now, I got to use Death Machine, so I'm going to run that. And I'm actually having Squall be a little bit of a support unit for this group by running an AoE resist TMR buff. So no one in this group can buff AoE resist. Ashen King Mont can buff single target resist, and he also gives that honeycomb barrier. So I want to see how that interaction works. This fight, if both of these units can get to Squall, who's my slowest unit in this setup, and buff him, they will both apply a honeycomb barrier buff to Squall. That means I need to turn Squall's honeycomb barrier buff off. Like his self buff, he doesn't need it right here. So I could turn on Seat, so force barrier. Yeah, he just doesn't need it, man. Although his is a little bit higher range, I'll just see how it works. I wonder if he casts that or not. I want to make sure he has Boon of the Lion turned on for that AoE resist buff. And then it's kind of awkward for Squall here, but I'm going to force him in there. I need an AoE resist buff. Ashen King Mont's honeycomb barrier buff also gives single target resist. So I wonder if he will run over and also apply it to Cipher. That'll be something interesting to see. And then Cipher's going to be self-buffing. I gave Mont a haste buff as well. I'm hoping I can find a free match to get things started right here. That's what I'm hoping for, because I have not done arena. Like, this has been a non-arena week for me as I build a deck with my father. And good, okay, the new free match incentives have been wonderful for actually finding matches. So we're gonna fight Balder here, running his new Cloud, maybe a great sword team, something like that. I got some unsweet tea. It's hot outside, man. It's hot in the summer. Let's have a drink. Okay, so here we go. We got our Squall in the middle. We got Cipher and Ashen King Mont to the side. Ashen King Mont's going to go Mont's Wishes. There's that honeycomb barrier buff with the unit resist attached to it. And then Cipher is going to do his own buff over on the side. That's actually fine. Now Squall will boon him the lion. And so Squall and Ashen King Mont are kind of playing off of themselves right here. What my thought was this, with Squall being in the middle and running forward, I did not give him any haste. I figure, like, if he's going to be the one most into the combat immediately, I'll let the other two haste so they kind of catch up. But it all depends on turns. This looks like a pretty short map. Ashen King Mont's going to go Divine Gift. So he prefers his second self buff to the haste buff, and so does Cipher. So if I want them hasting themselves instead of casting their self buffs, I will have to turn those self buffs off so they will start prioritizing their TMRs. That's the first lesson we've learned right here. I'm also very curious to see what kind of damage Cipher does, as Squall just takes nothing from that cloud. You love to see it. Takes nothing from the Edward. And now Baldur's Ferris gonna run up here. He's gonna drop a little a little limit break. What are my words at? Anyway, there's the Ferris. Oh god. Squall tanked all of that like a god. So you can see our layers of damage reduction that we're stacking are just doing work. Ashen King Mont is teeing off right there. Let's see Cipher's first attack on my account. What do you got, Cipher? Bloodfest. Boom. Decent damage right there with that big debuff attached to it. So Bloodfest, I believe that's the one that does the AoE reduction. And then nice chaining with Squall right there with the Winding Blade coming out. The only thing they have left is a 1 HP Cloud, who's going to attempt to kill all of us and not really do that much. So obviously, like, I don't know what the state of like Baldur's account is right here. Don't really know what I'm fighting against. Would this team have been as effective in like a Guild Wars situation? Probably not, because like you're probably not fighting that team in Guild Wars, but we did learn a little bit right there. We learned some priority for the AIs for both Ashen King Mont and Cipher actually. So what I'm going to do, I think I would prefer haste to that self buff, which then runs me into that really common dilemma you have in this game, where if you want to use your TMR, you often have to, I want to make sure Bloodfest plus, yeah, this is the AoE resist slowing move. So you saw that in action right there, right? Cipher drops that, and then, excuse me, Squall comes in, boom, and just like AoE resist penetrates the heck out of him. Nice little wombo combo right there. I loved it. So I want to turn off Bravado here. I still, even though he wasn't getting to Squall to cast his group buff on him, I still want him casting it because it's so good for himself. So we'll turn his Knight's buff off. Now let's see if he prefers Dragon. I'm going to turn Swift Drake Banner off. I don't want that on. But I wonder if he prefers Dragon Scale to the TMR. Let me make sure the TMR buff is actually on. It shouldn't be off. Yeah, it's on. Okay, and then Ashen King Mont, I also want to turn your self buff off so you get haste as well. And this is something, man, this is a really good self buff to turn off. It's a real good self buff to turn off, but haste is so good. Okay, well, we're going to try again, another free match. So many maps in War of the Visions, and I think you can adjust party formation here, right? Can I do initial placement adjustment? Yeah, I will initial placement adjust. Might as well take advantage so we can see the full thing in action. One thing to think about while I'm doing this is, even though, and I'll put Cipher like here so he can move, he can't really, he could go, I need to just put him over here. Like I need to put Cipher here, Squall here, and now they'll just all move to him. This will extend the map a little bit as well. So in this scenario, what I'm really curious to see is if Cipher does prefer his High Dragoon self buff, and maybe the enemy starts in the opposite corner of the map, simulating a little bit of a longer map, maybe then we get 3 buffs. I think Cipher's a good candidate for a 3 buff rotation, but his self buffs, in my opinion, can be a TMR. I think there's better TMR options out there, including some of the good haste TMRs, which I have him equipped with now. And I really was trying when I was building this team a second ago to think of a way to work Cipher's own TMR buff in there. Oh, this will be really interesting. So he just picked up the wider area, you know, the honeycomb barrier from Mont, and he goes ahead and recasts his own. I was really curious to see if he would do that, and he did. Now, Squall's going to prioritize him with the AoE resist buff because he was in slot 1 and Ashen King Mont was in slot 3. So there's some tweaking I could do there to try to make it so they all moved into next to Squall, like maybe put Cipher too far away from Ashen King Mont. So for one, their buffs aren't like overlapping each other. And for two, they would both receive Squall's AoE resist buff. Now there's the haste buff for Mont, so he's gone ahead and done that. Let's see if Cipher haste buffs himself. He does. So he prefers the haste to his Dragoon subjob buffs. And now Squall will force barrier himself, which Squall's in a weird place in this group with his buffs. He's kind of like, I preferred him in that moved forward position where he doesn't even necessarily get a second buff because he doesn't need it. Like, Squall's buffs just aren't that, I don't know. Outside of his force barrier self buff, which is not necessary in this group, his buffs kind of fall off. Okay, Cipher, big damage. Get in there and start working people. There's Bloodfest. That's that AoE resist debuff. He dropped that on them, and you saw that healing, 6,300 healing on himself. Mont has nothing to do, and I was a little bit concerned about this. I've extended the map as Squall max damages, you know, right there against a water unit, which is no surprise. I extended the map by putting everybody into a corner while simultaneously turning off buffs, and you run into this problem right here, where I would have been a lot better off had we 2 buff rotations right into the enemy. But our defensive buffs and our stacking of AoE resist, single target resist, honeycomb barriers, it's really working out as they just cannot hurt us. Okay, Cipher, what kind of damage you got right here? Only 38 AP, which he might have a bit of an AP problem if he's not allowed to give himself his AP auto restore self buff. That's another thing to consider, but AP auto restore buffs are not the most reliable thing in the game right now with so many people running those Wind Veritas TMRs. Okay, so there's my first little experiment with Cipher. I think he's good. You saw him in action right there. Most of what I'm worried about here is his buff rotations. So on a shorter map, I don't know. He does well either way. This is how you set him up. If you turn his group buff on and his self buff from his main job off, he will go group buff, TMR, then he'll probably look for his self buff from High Dragoon. If you leave his self buff in his main job on, he will prioritize that over his self buff from a TMR. So that's what I've learned in this video right here. Just sharing that with you guys today. Just a first little look at what I'm gonna be doing with Cipher. Thank y'all for watching. I hope you guys are having a great day. Really looking forward to next week when I can like fully flex this guy. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.